Hello and welcome to Fade to PB8. In this episode, we'll be coloring in this picture of a dog sitting on top of a turtle. We'll go through start to finish, and I will kind of talk you through some of my strategies and what my thought process was. Hope you enjoy. Thank you. So I started with the background, specifically the clouds. And for the clouds, I use the blender marker right away. I kind of get them wet with one or two layers of the blender marker. And then I go in with, I have like a very light yellow, then a light gray, and then a light blue on the bottom of the clouds. And I find that using the blender marker right away just kind of helps lighten up everything, because you'll find that even the lightest gray is slightly too dark for a white cloud, but you really don't want to use just the paper itself. You don't want to just leave it blank and say, oh, I'm going to use the white of the paper. You really want to put down some color to every single part, even if it's like the white of an eyeball or the white of a cloud. It doesn't matter. You really just want to put down a color. It just makes it look a lot better. I've experimented with both, and I've really found that even just the lightest gray looks much better than just using the white of the paper. So for the sky, I fade from light to dark. I pretty much always go light to dark, and fading really depends on the difference between your markers. So these blues that I'm using are actually pretty close together. I think I use 4 different blues. They're all Ohuhu brand. And since they're close together, it makes it a lot easier to fade. So I really only put down about 2 layers. Now, if I'm doing like a much bigger jump from one marker to another, you're going to have to go over it 3 or 4 times. But usually I would say if the markers are pretty close, you can get a nice fade just by going over it twice. Now, for the grass, you'll notice that I kind of scatter this green around, and then I've got a similar green that I'm going to fill in the other blanks with. So I'm kind of like saturating some areas, and I'm briefly going over some areas. I'm leaving some areas completely blank on purpose. And I'm doing that because I want the color to be different. I want it to change. I want there to be a little bit of a gradient. I don't want it to be monotone. Okay, if I filled in this grass all the same color, the picture would look very flat. It would be kind of boring. It just wouldn't look right. So here you'll see, so I normally would just take one section and start and finish it right then and there, because once the ink hits the paper, it starts to dry, and we generally like to work with white ink. But this one I kind of made an exception because I had to kind of go around these little pebbles, these little rocks, and I was thinking to myself, like, if I color in the pebbles with the green and then I go over it with like a darker gray, will I even see that green? Like, could I just go over those pebbles and make the whole job a little bit quicker? And that's kind of what I ended up doing. I just get the pebbles a little bit green, and then I go over them a little bit later with the warm gray marker to color them in, and you don't see the green at all. So it's always important to kind of know, like, plan things out and like have an idea of what colors things are going to be and how dark they're going to go. And can I cross this line? What happens if I get this area the wrong color? As long as that wrong color is light and you plan on going over it with a darker marker, you should be safe. So when I'm back to the grass, I've got 2 or 3 greens that are pretty similar tone, and I kind of scatter them around, and it creates like this gradient. It just makes it look non-flat. And then I also come in with kind of like a yellow-green, and I didn't even have that yellow-green picked out right away, but I knew that, I know that I might make some changes. Like, once I pick my palette at the very beginning, it's not set in stone. I've got my whole set of markers just off screen, so I go in and grab that yellow green. No big deal. When I'm I start light and I go darker and I go darker until I'm happy. And the shadow, you want to kind of have like an idea of what's going to be the darkest spot of your drawing. So for the grass, I'm thinking right underneath the turtle will probably be the darkest shadow. And so you can see that I'm kind of working in that shadow right there. And so I think the darkest color for the entire drawing is going to be the shadow underneath the turtle. And so I look at the code of the marker that I chose, and the last digit was, I think it was 11. So Ohuhu has a coding system with their new codes, not the old codes, but the new codes. And the last digit, or sometimes 2 digits, will be 1 through 15. and it will kind of tell you how dark it is. So 1's the lightest, 15 is the darkest. And for the shadow, I chose to go with, I think, a 10 or 11. And that's just because I want the whole thing to look kind of cartoonish. I want it to be bright. I want it to be happy and fun. So when I'm choosing all my colors, paying attention to that last digit is really important because it helps make the things kind of go together. So I'm doing these animals in the background, and I'm going to try to hit those same targets, like the mid-range darkness. And I'm going to try to avoid going past like a 10 or 11 in the Ohuhu coding system. Now, for the animals, they're fun, they're friendly. I don't even know what they are. I'm not. This is AI generated, and the AI is pretty good, but it's not always great. So you have to kind of play around with it a little bit. But you know what? I just went with it, and I like these animals. So I use some browns, and I kind of make each one slightly different. I didn't want all the animals to be the exact same color, so they've got slightly different shades of brown to them. And just having slightly different colors is very subtle, but like when you have slightly different colors throughout the entire image, it just makes it look so much better. It really, really does. Even though your attention's not drawn there, and your attention's probably going to be drawn to the dog and the turtle, just having things look, just subtle, small changes, they all add up and they bring the whole thing to life. Same thing with these flowers. You'll see, if you look at my palette, you'll notice that I've got one palette, one selection for basically the stems. But I've got 3 different sets of 4 markers for the flowers. And I basically just wanted each flower to look different. I didn't want them all to be the same color. And it's really important that, it's nice having a larger marker collection where you can choose different colors. And if you can't, try blending different markers together on the paper. See what you can come up with. But yeah, try to avoid using the same color over and over and over again. Again, that's why I pick out my palette ahead of time, because I know that the, let's say the browns that I use for the animals in the back, I want to use a different brown than for the dog in the front. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. So now as I do the dog, I'm paying attention to the background and everything around it. Again, try not to go darker than like a 10 or 11 on the Ohuhu scale. I don't want to go darker than that shadow beneath the turtle, unless it makes sense. It's also really important to think about like what you're coloring in, like where it's okay to make a mistake. If I went too dark if I screwed up something on the dog and I did go too dark, I think it's okay, because you could actually go a little bit darker with a dog and you just say, oh, you know what? This dog naturally has darker fur. I started with like kind of this orangish brown, but you know what? I messed up. Let's make it a darker brown dog, and you'll be okay with that. But with the grass, you can only go so dark, and the grass naturally only gets so dark. So be careful with, just know where you can make mistakes, know how you can kind of get out of it, and just be aware of like your surroundings. You can always go darker. So the sky, I started pretty light. Let's just say everything else ended up a little bit darker than I anticipated. Well, I can go back over the sky with slightly darker markers. I don't need to. I don't end up doing that in this drawing, but I have that option. So, this drawing took me, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 hours. Some drawings I do take 5 or 6 hours, and it's hard to plan everything ahead. You don't really know what the drawing's going to look like until it's done, sort of. But you're going to make mistakes along the way. And you have to be able to correct those mistakes and kind of work with those mistakes. It's kind of like how Bob Ross used to say, we have happy accidents. It's the same thing. Once that ink hits the paper, as long as it's not wet, as long as the ink is wet, it's actually fairly easy to make corrections. You can even go lighter with a lighter marker. You want to use the chisel tip if you're going to try to go lighter. Just be careful with the chisel tip that you don't push too hard, because you can end up damaging the paper. Now for the paper selection, I use 60-pound weight. I find that 60-pound is kind of a medium weight paper. If you use regular printer paper, that's 20-pound. Yes, it uses less ink. The paper saturates more quickly, but it also dries a lot more quickly. And so you have to it's just less forgiving if you use 20-pound paper. But 60-pound paper, you can make mistakes. You can push with the chisel tip a little bit. You can go over it 5, 6, 7 times before it's fully saturated. Now, if you do find that you've gone over a certain area too many times and the paper gets too wet, you want to let it dry a little bit. You really don't want to work on paper that is fully saturated, because what ends up happening is the ink spreads and it will cross lines. So what I just did there with the hair dryer was just kind of dried it off a little bit. It's still damp. I didn't dry it off completely, but I just dried it off a little bit so I could still work with it. And then for the underbelly of the turtle, you'll notice that I kind of mixed between these browns and this greenish color that I have. I wasn't entirely certain what I wanted the final result to look like. Something between a brown and a green. I kind of have the head and the belly and the arms slightly different, but I also have some common colors. It's good to have common colors that kind of bring everything together. So I have this very light green that I go over everything with, and I also have a light brown that I go over everything with, and it just brings all those parts of the turtle back together. Even though the end result ends up being different, they still all share some colors together, and it just brings it all together. So it's really good to have common colors throughout different parts of the drawing if you want to bring things together and make them look more natural. So I guess the only thing I would have done a little bit differently on this is maybe a little bit more shading on the turtle's head. But I'm actually pretty happy with the end result of this drawing. I think all your attention is right on the dog, then on the turtle, then maybe the animals in the background. And I think the dog turned out really, really nicely. The turtle came out pretty well too. When you use the hairdryer, do the backside as well. Again, don't do it too much, because you might warp the paper or damage the paper. But overall, it turned out pretty well. So thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned something. Thank you.